Very warm welcome to you, everybody. I am going to introduce Philip StLawrence, who is an inspirational speaker. He's been at the Chalk Valley History Festival, the Shaftesbury Festival, and he's now come to talk to us. He lives locally in Sway, and he is, in a few weeks' time, also going to be giving a talk at the community centre, which he will tell you about. So, Philip, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, picture, if you will, we are standing together, each and every one of us, on the quay at Plymouth. It's Sunday morning, the 2nd of April, 1587. And as far as the eye can see, there are ships, many of them, all being loaded up with victuals, with soldiers, with provisions, and we can hear all around the shouting as officers command their men to get on board quickly. The noise, the frenetic activity, it is commotion, and there's a tension in the air. It is a symphony of tense and thrilling anticipation of the drama to come. And not one of these men has the slightest idea that they are going to be going where tourists on cruise liners and the rest go today, to Lisbon, to Cadiz, to the Azores, to the Iberian coast. How sad it is, I have to say to you, ladies and gentlemen, that so few of those tourists have the slightest idea of the great drama that is about to unfold. But we few, we happy few, we are going to relive that drama right now. Barely 2 weeks have passed since Elizabeth I and Parliament have given their consent, back on March the 15th, to the sending of a task force to disrupt the Spanish Armada fleet. Yes, for years, England has had a bad dream. That dream that, yes, Philip is, he's threatening to invade. It could happen. It's been a dream. But now, in these early months, these spring months of 1587, that dream, ladies and gentlemen, has become a nightmare. It really, truly is. We've had Philip of Spain, who for years has prepared for this. He's done so with the help of his supreme maritime commander, the Marquis de Santa Cruz, who even at this moment is in Lisbon. He's in Lisbon with the Armada fleet. But whilst the planning has gone on for years, it's only now that Philip is absolutely intent upon launching the Armada. He has grown tired of England. Back in 1584, at the Treaty of Joinville, he had intended to eradicate Protestantism in this country. And his attitude, in a way, was, how dare little England eschew Catholicism? How dare England have the temerity to go its own way? England must be brought to heel. We've heard these words before, of course. And he's had his nemesis, and we all know who his nemesis has been. Admiral, yes, not sea dog, not pirate, not captain, Admiral Sir Francis Drake. And he's Sir for a very good reason. When he went round the world in taking 3 years at sea, as the great writer John Sugden has said, when knighthoods are dished out today with the frequency of buying postage stamps, it's hard for us to even begin to comprehend the extent of Drake's feat. 3 years at sea, 36,000 miles. He went 68 days at one point in the Pacific without even seeing land. And when he got back, people at the time said he was the greatest mariner of his age. So he'd earned that knighthood. And now he's an admiral, and as we shall see, a very clever admiral too. Drake had his downsides. I'm not afraid to say that. But he also, we should be fair, had his good sides as well, as we shall see. For years, Drake has taunted him. He's mocked Philip. Philip has been saying, England must be brought to heel, but Drake has said, no. And he's taunted Philip. He's mocked him. He's humiliated him. In fact, sometimes when I've had a drink or two, which is very rare, of course, I like to think the relationship between Drake and Philip of Spain is akin to that of Nigel Farage and Guy Verhofstadt. There's truth in that. And so Drake is preparing his people. And as we stand there on this Sunday morning, the 2nd of April, we can hear him giving his commands. Captain Thomas Fenner wrote, Drake was urging the men on. He uses these words, stirring their minds. And what he meant by that, Fenner, was that Drake was giving them financial incentive to get a move on. And why? Because Drake knew that there was every possibility that Elizabeth could change her mind at any moment. She was notoriously indecisive. As John Sugden has said, one of the greatest biographers on Drake, he said that lovely, eloquent phrase, he said, trying to nail Elizabeth down was the equivalent of trying to nail jelly to a wall. 400 years after these events, another task force, of course, will set sail from Plymouth. And when it does, Enoch Powell will stand up in the House of Commons and he'll say, soon we shall find of what metal our leader is made. Drake might have used those words about Elizabeth. Is she going to revert to appeasement and diplomacy with Spain? Or is she going to agree to stick with the orders she's given? She has given the orders to the task force to go out and stop the Armada, to disrupt it. And Drake is going to do that. He has a number of ships that Elizabeth has supplied. He has the Bonaventure, which he commands, the Golden Lion, which William Barrow commands, the Dreadnought, there's a famous name from our naval history, which Thomas Fenner commands, and the Rainbow, commanded by Henry Bellingham. And in addition, Drake has had support from merchantmen of London, who supplied another 15 ships. And we have to ask, well, why was that necessary? And the reason, ladies and gentlemen, is this. Conservatives today talk about a low-tax economy. In fact, that's just an aspiration. Did you see recently we're about to go to 41.6% of GDP is going to be spent by the government. But in Elizabeth I's day, experts believe that the percentage of our GDP that was spent by the government was less than 5%. We truly were a low-tax economy. And because of that, the Navy effectively was privatized. And so to defend the country, we relied upon merchantmen supplying these ships for which they expected a return upon their investment. Which is why Drake felt it his duty to actually, which he did, we all know, he's notorious for it, plunder enemy shipping and give them that return. So when we call him a pirate, actually a more accurate term is a privateer. And for a second reason too, he was doing it by and large with the consent of his sovereign. But let's go back to this Sunday morning, the 2nd of August. Drake actually, they depart, and we can imagine them. He's got 26 ships, and he's got 3,000 men. And we can imagine them on that Sunday afternoon going across the channel. They are joined by 2 more vessels from dear old Lyme Regis, which some of you will know and love, I have no doubt. As they go, Drake feels exalted. He feels a certain freedom. He's worried that Elizabeth will change her mind. And sure enough, ladies and gentlemen, she does precisely that. A pinnacle is sent out from Plymouth 9 days later. And it bears a message from Queen Elizabeth. And that message says, Drake, you can disrupt them now at sea. Yes, stop the Armada there. But I'm no longer wanting you to set foot on Spanish property. Don't damage their land, their property. Now, the pinnacle never reaches Drake, of course. He's well away. And it is arguable, ladies and gentlemen, that Elizabeth I never intended it to reach Drake. But it allows her to keep the diplomatic bonds open with Spain. I call him Wonderful Walsingham. You all know who I'm speaking of. Francis Walsingham. Francis Walsingham, who, by the way, later gave his name to Francis Walsingham St. Barbe. Did you all know that? To the end of the 18th century. Yes. And Francis Walsingham, her Secretary of State, Elizabeth's change of mind allows him to send a letter to our ambassador in Paris. His name is Sir Edward Stafford. Walsingham believes that this man Stafford is a spy. He's in the pay of Spain. instead of bringing him back and trying him for treason and then executing him, Waltzing, who's very astute and very patriotic, he actually uses Waltzing to further the Queen's interests. He sends a letter to, he uses Stafford, and he sends a letter to Stafford saying, the Queen has rescinded her order and Drake is not allowed to go on Spanish land and damage Spanish property. And he believes that this will end up in the hands of Spain. And it does. It does. It keeps the diplomatic bonds open with Spain. And ladies and gentlemen, you might ask, well, why is it that Sir Edward Stafford is in the pay of Spain? Certainly he's a traitor to Britain, but also he is in debt. He has big gambling debts. Why? Because he gambles with the brother of the King of France. Remember, he's the ambassador in Paris. The King of France is King Henry III, but his brother is the Duke of Alençon. And there's an interesting little aside here that, as they say, well, this is intriguing. If we study the history of Agincourt, Henry V, 170 years before, we find that during that battle, at approximately, we can't be absolutely precise, but around 1:15 in the afternoon, during the Battle of Agincourt, Henry V, along with his brother Humphrey, who's the Duke of Gloucester, is almost slain, and who by? By the Duke of Alençon, who was the direct ancestor of the man to whom Sir Edward Stafford now owes money. I just add that in. It's an interesting, that's a free bonus, by the way, Prue. And so, anyway, away they go. When they get to Brest, and they round into the top of the Bay of Biscay, a storm brews. And Drake's task force of these 26 ships, they're all separated, but they come together just off Lisbon. And when they do, they get on board 2 Flemish merchantmen who give Drake vital information. And what they say is this: it is true, the Armada is assembling in Lisbon, and it wants to sail. Invasion this summer, 1587. But in Cadiz, there are up to 60 vessels, 60, loaded up with provisions for the Armada fleet, and they are awaiting their arrival. Ladies and gentlemen, can we even begin to imagine how Drake reacts to that? He reacts, this is music to his ears. So let's go forward just a couple of days. The drama is building. We go to Wednesday, the 19th of April, 1587. And Drake hovers off Cadiz. Let me show you a slide, if I may. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Cadiz. And as you can see, we have this wonderful old city at the end of the isthmus. And then we have the inner town and the new areas. And then, of course, that narrow strip that joins onto the Spanish mainland. And at the top of the picture, you can see the inner harbor. It's 4 miles across. Then we have the narrow point, a place called El Puntal. And then the outer harbor, where today cruise liners moor up. Drake calls his captains together, and he draws them up in the bottom left-hand part of this picture. Now, interestingly, if we go forward to Nelson, on the eve of Trafalgar, he called his captains together, and he had a very different style of leadership, by the way, to Drake, also just off this bottom left-hand corner, a few miles farther south, in fact, but in the same area of water. Absolutely fascinating coincidence. Drake calls them onto his ship, the Bonaventure. He says, gentlemen, we have a wonderful opportunity. 60 vessels. We must do our duty. We're going to go in and we're going to take their provisions and put them to the bottom of the sea. And then we're going to destroy those vessels so they cannot join the Armada. He's acting, remember, on... And still, this is at sea, by the way. This isn't at land. So actually, he's within Elizabeth's revised orders, which is an interesting point. One amongst Drake's captains, Captain William Barrow, objects strongly. He says, Drake, you've got to be stark raving mad. You'll never get away with this. This is ludicrous. You'll never get away with this. Now, I love talking to companies about leadership and things like this. Just briefly, let's just say this. This man, William Barrow, he's what we call a procedures man. He's in modern psychology and leadership. He's a procedures man. He's conformist. He likes to go by the rule book. He'd be ideal in something like quality control. But Drake is very different. Drake is what we call an options man. He is non-conformist. He's happy to break the rules. And he's somewhat autocratic as well. Sachara Honda. Some of you good people will drive a Honda motor car, I have no doubt. Honda said this. He said, be your own master. Do not always follow in the footsteps of others. Drake was like that. He was happy to be his own master. He was somewhat autocratic. We could spend an hour or more discussing different prime ministers we've had in our country and their styles, some of whom have been somewhat autocratic, and others who've been much more collegiate. Nelson was more collegiate and more democratic, but Drake is more the autocratic style. Drake gets his own way, and they agree that very evening they are going to go into Cadiz and do their damnedest. And William Barrow, there's nothing he can do about it. He's very angry, but he doesn't get his way. And so they go in. They go in to Cadiz. I feel that, I don't know how many of us good people have been to Cadiz. Cadiz, for me, is one of my favorite places. It's one of my favorite places on this planet. And again, I have to say how sad that so many holidaymakers, cruise liners and the rest, they go there and they haven't the first idea of what happened. But let's live the drama now together. Cadiz, in my opinion, my humble opinion, is at its very best about 3 hours before sunset, when people are in the old square. It's been a joyous day. It's a balmy spring evening, early evening, late afternoon, and they're enjoying a cold drink. What does Drake do? He goes in with his 26 ships into the outer harbour. He keeps his flags furled so that nobody can tell his identity. He's going to wait till any galleons that come out to challenge him are within 200 yards, which is his accurate range for musket and cannon fire. Pedro de Acuna, in charge of the galleons in Cadiz, this huge harbour, he sees what's happening. He sends 2 galleons out. They're rowed out. They're usually rowed, by the way, by slaves. They rowed out to try to challenge Drake. Drake sits there. He's gliding in at perhaps no more than 2, maybe 3 knots. He has a gentle wind following him, but he keeps his flags furled and his powder dry. Augustin Hrošović, who's a customs officer actually in Cadiz at the time, he gives us a description of what happened. He says, on the wharves of Cadiz, there was frenetic activity as men went about their business, loading these Armada-destined vessels. He said, he went on like this, Hrošović. He said, Drake came in like a predator stalking its prey. He goes on, he says, Drake had more arrogance and speed than any pirate had ever done. And meanwhile, in old Cadiz, in that wonderful old square in the center, at its best on an early spring evening, as I've said, another observer said, we were having a drink in the old square. We were watching an acrobatic team display, just like we might today. In the nearby square, just adjacent, others are watching a play. It's a comedy play, a bawdy comedy play. And nobody knows what's happening. If we had to put music to this great drama, ladies and gentlemen, might I suggest it should be that central section of Rossini's overture of William Tell, when the music is so quiet before Rossini suddenly unleashes the orchestra. Because as those people are sitting there in the old square of Cadiz, what happens? Suddenly the sound of cannons is heard, booming across the bay of Cadiz. The noise ricocheting and echoing between the old buildings. And there's pandemonium. The people are running in all directions. The acrobatic team display, it stops straight away. I'm sure the bawdy comedy play did as well. Pedro de Acuna, he brings his 2 galleons back, and he sends out 8 more to try and confront Drake, who's now unfurled his flags with the cross of St. George, revealing his identity. They must have been scared, because they knew El Drake's reputation. My God, it can't be him, surely. Drake has no intention, we should be clear, of setting foot in Cadiz. He bears the civilians, as on many other occasions, no ill will at all. His mission is very clear. He's ordered his men to shoot up the ships, then to board them, then to empty them of provisions, and then to set them on fire and sink them so they are not able to join the Armada invasion fleet. He goes in. He sees in front of him a warship. The first ship that he sees weighs 1,000 tons. What does Drake do? He shoots it up and he sinks it. Meanwhile, in old Cadiz, people are running in every direction. And it's worth saying, it's a very sad situation, because the civilians, God bless them, they don't know that he's not there to attack them. There's no record of him ever setting foot in Cadiz itself. But they don't know that. And what they do, and this is deeply sad, some of the people, they run to the Matagorda Castle. And they say to the captain, please, let us in. Let us in. And he's obliged to open the great iron gates of the Matagorda Castle. And women and children, they go inside. But then that captain, ladies and gentlemen, makes a fateful decision. Because what he does, he says, I've got enough people in this castle. He orders the gates to be closed. And as they are, in the rush and the crush and the stampede, over 20 civilians are killed. It's terribly sad. The corregidor, who's the mayor, if you will, his name is Joan de Vigo. He sends soldiers into the square to try to take order. And then he sends messengers across the narrow spit and away to Seville and Jerez. And how sad are the people visiting these wonderful places. Some of you will know Seville, Jerez, where wonderful Tío Pepe sherry is made, of course. And he says, send me help. Now, I have to tell you, when the good people of Seville, got this message late that evening of Wednesday, the 19th of April, they must have been in panic. Drake, he's in Cadiz. Could he come here to Seville? And there would have been panic in the streets, those awesomely beautiful streets of Seville and along the water's edge. But I must tell you, ladies and gentlemen, Spanish observers a few years before had described their own soldiers who were billeted at Seville as being little more than rogues, vagabonds, and tosspots. I wish I could say that like Rowan Atkinson, tosspots. But Drake is intent. He said to his captains at that 4 o'clock meeting, we are going in now. I want action this day. We think of Churchill, who wrote with his big black fountain pen, always in red ink. What did he write? Action this day. Drake is doing the same. He doesn't mess about. He's an opportunist. Let's have a look at a picture of what was happening. I think you'll agree this sums it up. The early evening of this Wednesday, the 19th of April. And Drake is shooting these ships, he's boarding them, he's emptying them of provisions for the Armada. And we know that by late that evening, he'd got many tons and thousands of tons had gone to the bottom of the sea. And he's, by this time, got at least 20 vessels, we believe. Historians vary on all of these things, but vessels that are sunk. That evening, William Barrow goes to Drake, and he remonstrates. He says, Drake, this is madness. Get out while you can. Just get out now. You've done your bit, get out. But Drake, he knows this is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end. We think of Churchill's words. What did Churchill say? You all know the great words. Let's do it, try to do it. No, this is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. It is, however, the end of the beginning. Do you remember those words? By the way, are you all into body language? People who have their head forward? Intellectual, cerebral, very explosive cerebral thought. Watch out for the man who stands like this. He's got other things on his mind. Yeah? So Churchill's just getting, Drake is just getting into his stride. And the next morning, Thursday, the 20th of April, what does he do? Far from withdrawing, he goes deeper into the harbour. He sees in front of him, as dawn breaks, as the light comes up, a 1,500-ton warship. It's one of the Marquis de Santa Cruz's most prized warships. It is 2.5 times the size and the weight of Drake's own ship, the Bonaventure. What does Drake do? Can we all imagine? He shoots it, he boards it, he sets fire to it, and he loots it, and he sets fire to it, and he sinks it. More or less in that order. And ahead, his task force are doing the same with all these other ships. William Barrow is now, what can we say? He's beside himself. This is madness. You'll never get away with this. You must be stark, raving mad. And he goes on a rowing boat out to a ship called the Merchant Royal, and he confronts Captain Robert Flick. He says to Flick, "Where is Drake? This has got to stop." Flick says, "Drake's not here. He's even farther in. He's gone on ahead." Flick later described the countenance and the body language of Barrow. He said he looked a scared man. Interesting observation. But later, Barrow does find Drake, probably somewhere around lunchtime, we can't be certain, on this Thursday, the 20th of April. And he remonstrates with Drake. He says, "Look, I'm going west." And he goes back to his ship, the Golden Lion, and he leads his ship 2 miles out towards the west, back into the outer harbour. Pedro de Acuna, in charge of the galleons, sees that Drake's fleet is splitting up. So what does he do? He aims his galleons and his shore batteries onto those ships. But Drake, who's always a resourceful, whatever his sins in life, one thing he is, he's a very resourceful leader. And he sees what is happening, and he sends some of his own ships out to try to protect the Golden Lion, thus depleting his own force in the inner harbour. I'd like to show you a picture, if I may. This is a historic document, and this was drawn up by William Barrow himself. Now, it's an intriguing drawing. We could spend a long time looking at it. We don't quite know when he drew this, whether it was actually which day or whether it was sometime after. And I say that because of what transpires in the future. 1 year later, Francis Drake will take this man Barrow to a court of law back in England on a charge of insubordination. Mutiny, if you will. And it may be, ladies and gentlemen, that Barrow drew this in his own defense. It is interesting that he places his own ship. We can't see them all, and we can't go into detail. We'd be here several hours. But he's trying, I think, to justify his own position. But what an intriguing historical document that has been handed down. I think you will all agree. Absolutely intriguing. Drake carries on, and we must say that by around 3 in the afternoon of this Thursday, the 20th, he's done a huge amount of damage. It is believed by historians that between 30 and 40 vessels had now been sunk, and thousands of tons of provision sent to the bottom of the sea, or taken onto Drake's own ships. Drake now comes out of the outer harbour, and he says to his men, "Right, we've done our duty, we're now going to leave." But suddenly, nature steps in. Can you guess what happened? The wind died down. Drake and his task force are utterly becalmed. We think, ladies and gentlemen, of one of the 3 miracles of Dunkirk, when the 600 little boats went off and fishermen said, we'd never seen the English Channel so becalmed, as if Providence had stepped in. But on this occasion for Drake, Providence doesn't seem to be on his side. Ladies and gentlemen, he is stuck for the night, a second night of Thursday, the 20th of April. Observers describe then what happened. Pedro de Acuna sends out fire ships to try to damage and destroy Drake's fleet. He's sending out galleons. And by now, 6,000 soldiers have come in from Seville, from Jerez, from the surrounding area, led by the Duke of Medina Sidonia, who a year later will lead the Armada. And they're manning the shore batteries. They are determined now to stop Drake. They don't succeed. That night, an observer described Cadiz as being like a giant volcano, a giant torch. Somebody called it a scene from hell. Drake sends out rowing boats to push away the fire ships. And he turns to one of his captains, and with great bravado he says, typical of Drake, he says, well, the Spanish are doing our work for us. The next morning, what does Drake do? The wind comes up on Friday, the 21st of April. He's got his great victory. It's been the most audacious raid. He's put back the Armada by months and months. And on Friday, the 21st, as if to celebrate our present Queen Elizabeth's birthday on the 21st of April, mine too, as it happens, Drake leaves. And as he does, he sends a message to Pedro de Acuna. He offers to do a swap. He says, ladies and gentlemen, let me give you back some of the prisoners I've taken from your galleons on condition that you liberate some of your slaves rowing your galleons. He doesn't get an answer. But as he goes, the humiliation has been intense. When Philip of Spain hears this, can we even begin to guess how he reacts? Can you guess? Philip is seething. He's utterly humiliated. But actually, he's also admiring. He uses these words. He says, the daring of Drake at Cadiz. The Pope, no less. When the Pope hears it, he says this. He says to his men, look at Drake. He uses those words, look at Drake, as if to say, why can't you be like Drake? Now, how do we feel, ladies and gentlemen? The Marquis de Santa Cruz is feeling now. He's in Lisbon. He's humiliated. Do you know what he does? May I tell you this? They start a rumor in Lisbon and in Cadiz that Drake had fled like a chicken. Like a chicken. It's what today, ladies and gentlemen, we would call spin. And if we're looking for a historical parallel, I think of Sir Winston Churchill, who in December 1940, in front of an illustrious audience in Ottawa, reminded them of the words of Marshal Pétain, the Vichyite collaboratist, who in spring 1940 had said this, England will have its neck wrung like a chicken. Churchill reminds his audience in Ottawa of Marshal Pétain's words, and he turns to his audience, and I must get this right, not like this, but like this, and he says to his audience, well, this is after the Battle of Britain, of course, he says, well, some chicken, some neck. Drake could have used the same words, could he not? Whether he actually heard that rumor, we don't know. But as Drake goes, he goes due west from Cadiz. He sends a message to Francis Waltzing. May I quote the exact words that Drake sends? They're these words. Prepare ye, and prepare ye well, mostly by sea. Stop him now, and stop him forever. Look well to the coast of Sussex. Waltzing gets that dispatch. Both he and Drake know this is just the start. Drake is no appeaser, and Waltzing is no Halifax. They know they have to strike now. Let's go forward 1 week. And they go towards Cape St. Vincent, approximately 130 miles to the west. And when they do, barely a week has gone by since they left Cadiz. William Barrow picks up a rumor. And the rumor is that Drake is going to the Cape and is going to try to attempt, can you believe this, to take Cape St. Vincent. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if we look at the map, Cape St. Vincent is above the sea of Cadiz. Are you with me? It's above the sea, and it's that pivotal point where all the traffic coming out of the Mediterranean, such as Italian artillery from Italy, soldiers from the Med, which now have to go, by the way, overland because of Drake's behavior, they have to go round the Cape and then up to Lisbon. So it's just above the Sea of Cadiz in this map. William Barrow hears what Drake is about. He says, you're stark raving mad. You're actually considering, I don't believe I'm hearing this, taking Cape St. Vincent. It is literally bonkers. You'll never get away with it. And on the 29th of April, in his cabin on the Golden Lion, William Barrow writes a letter. He pens a letter to Drake, his admiral. And in it, he accuses Drake of listening only to his own opinions. It's a litany of complaints, and it's quite personal and nasty. 3 days later, Drake gets this letter. He's sitting in the Bonaventure on the 2nd of May. It's now about, 10 days since they left Cadiz. And in front of his chaplain, and in front of Captain Thomas Fenner, who commands the dreadnought, Drake hauls Barrow in, and he reads in the Riot Act. He says, I will not accept this insubordination. I'm relieving you of your command of the Golden Lion. You are confined to your cabin, and I'm going to put in charge Captain John Marchant. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of this episode for the moment. I can feel the drama building. Can we stay here till midnight? Maybe not. But Drake only hovers off the Cape. He changes his mind. Drake was always on the move. He now changes, and he goes 30 miles east to Lagos. Now, some of you will know Lagos, near Praia de Luz on the Portuguese Algarve. Lagos is still the most beautiful place, a lovely walled town with a marina and a harbour. And Drake's thinking is this: if I can take Lagos, yes, I can disrupt the Armada the provisions coming out of the Med and heading for Lisbon. What does he do? He lands 5 miles due east of Lagos, along the long, straight, beautiful long, straight, sandy beach, 5 miles east. Now, Drake always led from the front. His men, although his officers didn't always like him, as we've seen from Barrow, he was loved by his officers because he was one of them. He led from the front. He didn't mind getting his hands dirty. And he lands with 1,000 men, almost exactly 5 miles along the beach. 6 years ago, almost on the anniversary of the 200th anniversary of Waterloo, my son and my wonderful, wonderful daughter-in-law, they had their wedding reception at this exact piece of beach. I expected Drake to stop in for a drink, or his ghost, at any moment. We looked out for them. I didn't see him, but he might have been there. Drake leads his men across the top of the sand dunes, where now there's a long, straight tarmac road. And they get under the walls of Lagos, and there they see hundreds of pennants lining the walls. Hundreds of them. And it gives the impression to Drake that, well, Drake was a very clever man. We think of Drake, yes, he's arrogant, he's full of bravado, we know that, but he's also, let's give him credit, he's fluent, he's erudite, he's eloquent, he's intelligent. And he thinks, I could take this, but maybe the cost would be too high and my time would be better spent elsewhere. Margaret Thatcher once said, never fight a battle unless you know that you can win it. She was wrong on the poll tax, as you know. The Duke of Wellington, who ironically, ladies and gentlemen, liberated this area. He liberated all of Portugal, all of Spain, in his incredible feats in the Peninsular War, as you will know. But Wellington was known that for when he couldn't make a victory, he would make a calculated retreat. Drake does precisely that. He withdraws back along those 5 miles. And just like Wellington, there are times, ladies and gentlemen, when he has to form squares to protect his men from up to 400 Spanish horsemen. They get on the ships. Now, where do they go now? Could he go back? Is he going to go back to England? We're talking about Drake, aren't we? Of course not. Madness. He's only just started. He goes back to Cape St. Vincent, and then he does what seems to some of his officers, like Barrow, the impossible. Let me show you what he's up against, if I may. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Sargres Castle. This is just a couple of miles or so from Cape St. Vincent. It guards that point above the sea on the map I showed you, which turns round to go up the Bay of Biscay, Cape St. Vincent. And Sargres, as we can see, it's guarded, well, it's impregnable. The sea surrounds it on three sides with 200-foot towering vertical cliffs. The only way to attack Sargres Castle is up the main entrance from the land. So what does Drake do? He lands at the Bay of Billix. A couple of miles on, he walks through a minor fort, which offers no resistance, and he comes to these gates right in front of the castle here, and he says, "Surrender." It's defended by about 110 Portuguese soldiers with many cannons. And they decline Drake's offer. Not a very wise thing to do. Now, there's something I need to tell you at this point. These walls in this picture, ladies and gentlemen, are the walls that were built after the great earthquake that shook Portugal in 1755. In Drake's day, those walls would have been, it's reckoned by observers at the time, they were 40 feet high. 40 feet high and 10 feet deep. It is utterly impregnable. Now, whatever Drake may have been, he was a very resourceful commander, rather like Henry V, who was also incredibly resourceful. He goes back down the cliffs of the Bay of Billix, and he orders his men to gather up wood as faggots and to take them back up the cliffs. Now, this must have been heavy work. Drake is 47 years old. He's leading his men from the front. And going up those cliffs would have been quite a feat. If we're looking for a parallel, my mind goes to General James Wolfe, who, do you remember? He scaled the heights of Abraham in September 1759 before he took Quebec. And Canada became part of the British Empire instead of the French Empire. Of course, Canada went on to independence and very loyal, wonderful friendship, wonderful, wonderful country, and a great friend to Great Britain. Drake climbs these cliffs, rather like Wolfe scaled the heights of Abraham. But they're carrying these faggots. It must have been very hot, hot work, don't you think? Really hot. What do they say? Horses sweat, men perspire, and ladies, you glow. Isn't that true? But I do have to say, I think that Drake would have sweated, don't you? I think so. Well, he's a burly, stocky Devonian. And, well, a Devonian, he probably drank lots of scrumpy. I drink lots of scrumpy when I'm in Devon. It doesn't affect me in the slightest. My wife says it does, but she's completely wrong. But we imagine Drake getting to the top. And he has with him a wonderful military commander called Captain Anthony Platt. Remember, he's got soldiers in this task force. Now, what he does is utterly incredible. Let's just examine this, if we may. He orders Platt, and they agree together, Platt will take his men up the right flank and the left flank, up the right and left edges with his soldiers, and they had early muskets. And their mission is to draw the fire so while Drake and his men have the, very, very bravely, this is typical of Drake, they'll go up the middle, straight to the front entrance of the castle. But you'll see from the walls, can you see, ladies and gentlemen, the walls allow crossfire to come into the middle. So what Anthony Platt has to do is to draw that crossfire to the sides, the flanks, acting as a decoy. This is an extremely brave move. They all move forward together. They're drawing the crossfire. Drake and his men, with the faggots, they make it to the front entrance. And do you know what happens? They start to try to get in through that entrance to breach these 40-feet walls. But I must tell you, Sargres is to Drake what Harfleur was to Henry V. We think of Henry, do you remember the scene that Shakespeare gives us? Trying to breach the walls with his great commander, Sir John Holland. What does Shakespeare say? Once more, unto the breach, dear friend. I won't go on because this isn't a Henry talk, and I haven't had enough drink to do that. But the difference, ladies and gentlemen, is this. It takes Henry V 4 weeks to get inside Harfleur. It takes Francis Drake 4 hours to get inside Sargres. And when they get inside, as he so often did, he says, go. He bears no grudge. He says, go, you're free, you'll just go. But he takes the cannons and he pitches them over the cliffs. And those that are redeemable, he has put onto his own ships. Over the next few days, Captain Thomas Fenner wrote, we managed to stop another, can you guess, 47 vessels getting around the Cape to go up to Lisbon. And in all, Drake is on target to destroy 100 vessels. It's incredible. What does Drake now do? He leaves Thomas Fenner there, and he himself goes north. Where's he going to go? He's very daring. He goes to Lisbon, where the Armada actually is. And nothing is going to stop him. The eye of the tiger, or maybe we should say the mouth of the Tagus. And I feel so sad, again, that so many cruise company liners and the rest go there. They don't know what happened. But there's so much to say. You know, when we go into lovely Lisbon, some of you will know Lisbon, yeah? You have that wonderful bridge that spans right across. And on the right flank, entering Lisbon, the statue of our Lord Jesus Christ, as in South America. And on the left, way down, it's very, very high, but way down below, the wharves of Lisbon, the little quays in which are nestled some wonderful fish restaurants, one of which I can recommend to you. Drake sits outside the mouth, and the sight he would have seen was this: the Bethel Tower, completed approximately 40 years before Drake was there in 1587. This is one of the outer defences of Cadiz. It's still there today. The cruise liners go straight past it. Drake would have seen this sight. Drake sits there and he sends a message in to the Marquis de Santa Cruz. He says, come out and fight me and let's settle this thing. Can we imagine what Santa Cruz does? He declines the offer. Probably quite a wise decision, actually. So Drake just sits there and he blocks Lisbon for 2 days. He says, right, nothing's going to go into Lisbon and nothing is going to come out. And then he goes back. He's always on the move, Drake. He goes back to the Cape. He relieves Thomas Fenner and the others. And on the 22nd of May, this is what he does. He sends back to England at last those 15 merchant vessels and the others that he himself had supplied, back to England. He says, go back to England. Tell them what we did here. It's been magnificent. They have delayed the Armada by months with what they've done. When they leave, something else happens, which we should speak of. On board the Golden Lion, you remember we left William Barrow confined to his cabin, there is a mutiny. And the crew free him up from his cabin, and they put John Marchant, the captain, into a rowing boat. And they say, you want to be with Drake? Go to Drake. They all actually climb aboard again, and they go back to England. And as I said, a year later, Drake will have him in court on a charge of insubordination. But to Drake's anger, Barrow is exonerated. And it leaves Drake very angry for many years to come. And so what happens? Well, on the 22nd of, yes, here we go. On the 22nd of May, Drake leaves the Cape and he goes west. He goes to the Azores. And on the 8th of June, he takes that eastern island called San Miguel. And when he's taken it, They prepare to go back to England. But there's one thing more that stops Drake in his tracks. In front, by the way, he has only 9 ships left. He sent all the rest back, just 9 ships. Drake sees in front of them, ladies and gentlemen, the most enormous treasure ship. It's come not from the West Indies, from the Caribbean, it's come from the East Indies. And it's carrying twice the normal amount of treasure as was normally carried. When stories get back to England later of what now Drake does, the merchantmen of London, decades later, they will give birth to the East India Company to bring trade between Great Britain and India. So what now happens has a significance. Drake shoots at the ship, but not enough to sink it. He then boards it, and on board he finds all this treasure and 659 people on board. They do a roll call, 659, many of whom are black slaves who Drake has caught, the Spanish had caught in Africa and brought them back. What does Drake do? He liberates all the slaves. He's done that before, by the way, as well. And he gives them one of his own ships. He says, "You're free men, go wherever you wish." Drake then tows the San Felipe, this ship is called, all the way back to Plymouth. And they reach Plymouth at last on the 26th day of June, 1587. It takes 17 English vessels to carry that treasure round to London. The Marquis de Santa Cruz, who is utterly humiliated, he sends out a fleet all around the Azores, spending weeks and weeks looking for Drake. And that, combined with all the disruption and the destruction to his vessels that Drake had caused at Cadiz, causes the Spanish Armada invasion to be put off by an entire year. And if we consider what happened in August 1588, just imagine, ladies and gentlemen, if you will, proud Devonians standing at Bolt Tail at Hope Cove, or at Bolt Head at Salcombe, or at Prawl Point, that southernmost point of Devon, staring out to sea and watching the menacing sight of 130 Spanish galleons gliding their way up the channel. But they needn't have worried, because Drake was there, and he did, and more than did his duty, at Calais in stopping that armada. On the 28th day of January, 1596, Drake died in the Caribbean. Like Henry V, Drake died of dysentery. Like Henry V, Drake had shown enormous resourcefulness as a leader. Like Henry V, he had shown utter defiance to the people he considered enemies of Britain, of England as it was then. Ladies and gentlemen, how appropriate it is that Drake died aboard his ship at that time, which was called, you guessed, the Defiance. Thank you very much. Thank you. I thought you might like to see a couple of pictures of Drake, which I have for you. Here we go. Here's one. As you can see, this is actually myself. I don't think I've changed very much, I don't know. This was taken nearly 60 years ago when I played the part of Drake in 1066 and all that. You remember? At prep school, all those years ago. I thought I can still remember the song I had to sing, but I'm not going to sing it. And this is a better picture of Drake. If it'll come up, I think it will. There we go. A lovely oil painting, and one of my favorite quotes about Drake, that he actually wrote these words in 1587. Now, I'd be so delighted. Prue must come up and take over, obviously, but I wonder if any of you have any questions. Drake has been in the news in this age, slavery and all these things, statues. I wonder if anybody has any questions. May I ask? I don't know if, has anybody got any questions about Drake at all? Because I'd be delighted to answer any questions. Please. I hope I can hear you. Yeah, we've got a microphone coming to you.
Thank you. I had... do I have the switch? It's on. Do you... sorry, it's a bit louder than I expected it to be. I had read, I think probably on the web, a report from, I think, a Spanish ambassador, a current Spanish ambassador, talking about the situation with Drake's attack and saying that, in fact, he did land and that he had attacked and severely damaged a large part of Cadiz and that there were a lot of casualties. What, in fact, are the facts?
That there were casualties in Cadiz? Yes. What we know, and if we read John Sugden, Michael Turner, Julian Corbett, who are arguably the finest biographers there have been, he never set foot on Cadiz, and the casualties were from the galleons themselves, not actually civilians, although very, very sad. We know, as I said, that there were civilians who were killed, particularly in the crush. So that's what, if you read the different biographies from the observers, that's what they are saying. But I have no doubt there are different views and different historians, they all disagree on some of these things, so you're absolutely right. Any other questions? Sir?
At what stage, if ever, did Drake fall out with Queen Elizabeth I?
Fall out with Queen Elizabeth I?
Yes.
If ever. Do you know, sir, they got on extremely well, but they were very different. Drake was terribly determined and very decisive, always saying strike first. Elizabeth, but he amused Elizabeth, which a lot of men did, as you probably know. But I wouldn't say fall out, in my own view. That they disagreed from time to time, but she had a great respect for him. But in his latter years, it's true that, and he won great acclaim after his work in defeating the Armada in 1588, but in his latter years, he did lose it a little bit. He made some bad decisions in the 1590s and before he died. But I would not myself say that he actually fell out with her, if I may say that. I hope that answers. Can I make one point to you all, if I may, just to finish proof, that's all right. People have said, and it's been in the press, you would have seen about statues at Tavistock and all of this. Just to make the point to you, did he treat people well? Well, he has been besmirched by some historians. Even the BBC even described him and tried to compare him with Osama bin Laden, who, as you know, killed 3,000 people, World Trade Center. All I will say to that, I will not give you my opinion on that because it's unprintable, unrepeatable. But let's just look. If we look at John Sugden, Michael Turner, Julian Corbett, the greatest biographers, some of whom spent a lifetime studying the research on Drake, what we find is a different picture. And very quickly, I'll just show you this if I may, if that's all right. Look at the word above Corbett. It was described by some as affable. Now, there are occasions when Drake's men were not good to the Spanish people. We know that. And this happens in armies, which is terrible. But Drake himself, and when he controlled his men, even Spanish observers described him as having a good degree of humanity. But if we take the point about slavery, I'm sorry, I've gone on too far. Let me just show you this. In case you are asked, because it's been in the press, with regard to his statue at Tavistock, it is absolutely true, let's admit it openly, that in Drake's very early days, his formative years, he went to sea on a slave trading mission at least once with his cousin John Hawkins, who was a slave trader. But what historians very often either choose to ignore or don't know in the first place is that thereafter there are a number of instances when Drake liberates slaves, black people in Panama and other places, and he befriends them and he even fights with them. In fact, in 1573, thereabouts, they fought with him and they were loyal to him. They loved him. They had as much loyalty as perhaps Gurkhas do the British Army today. And he gave them presents, he gave them treasure, and even one of them, Diego, may have been the first black man to have gone round the world with Drake as his manservant. And in 1585, 1586, again, after he takes Cartagena in the Caribbean, there's a lovely story of how, when he's liberated them, a black boy gets murdered. And when he's murdered, Drake goes to the Spanish and says, "You will hand over the murderer." He defends the black people. And so we must try and be fair when it comes to Drake. Yes, he was a slave trader in his early life, but if we just leave it at that, it's like saying about an elderly person they were drunk because they got drunk in their 20s. It would be a misrepresentation, if I may say that. And don't forget that as Drake was alive, Barbary pirates were beginning a 300-year spree right across Europe and terrorizing the whole of the southern coast of England. And some historians believe that in that period, they took over 1 million white Europeans as slaves back to North Africa. You won't find this being taught in our schools very much, but it happened. And I'm just trying to make the point that slavery, which is the most abhorrent thing, does not respect skin color. It doesn't respect national boundaries. I think these things sometimes we need to remind ourselves of these things. I shall say no more. Thank you so much. It's been an absolute joy speaking to you all. Thank you. Cruz.
Well, thank you, Philip. You've brought to life a very, very interesting story, and I'm very grateful to you for coming to speak to us. As you can see, Philip is also going to talk to the Lymington Community Association. Have you got the date up there? Yes. On Henry V. And as you probably gathered during his talk, he knows a little bit about Henry V. So I believe you have some tickets available to sell.
Exclusive only to the Friends of St. Barb's. Yeah. So if anybody would like some, you're most welcome. I'll be right here with a mask on.
Thank you very much indeed. That was a very entertaining
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Prue.